Rules are the essence of every game or sport, and basketball is no different, although this game was created much simpler than it has now become. We have to admit that the rules are what make it so challenging and interesting to watch. However, like all sports, basketball has continued to evolve over the years. Some rules have been omitted, while others were added, but some players literally forced the NBA to change their rules. Now, that is a huge feat, regardless of what you think. Here is a list of 9 NBA players that forced rule changes in the NBA. But before we hoop in, for a chance to enter our giveaway to win the latest PlayStation console or the latest iPhone, like, subscribe, and comment the keywords displayed on the screen later on in this video. Shout out to Niria Mulales. I hope I pronounced your name right. Thank you for your support. I always do a random shout out of a subscriber, so if you want to get mentioned in my next video, subscribe now. Be sure to watch until the end, as number 1 will surely surprise you. Wilt Chamberlain. The 7'1" basketball player has often been regarded as the most dominating player in the NBA. Wilt has tons and tons of NBA records up his belt. In fact, some people speculate that he holds the record for having the most records in NBA. Quite an interesting fact, we reckon. Oh, and let's not forget his record of scoring 100 points in one game, a record that still remains undefeated until now. But let's come back to the topic. How did Wilt force NBA's hand to change the rule? Or rules. Yep, the guy actually forced the NBA to change multiple rules. The first rule was that shooters can't cross the free throw line during free throws, which Wilt regularly did before this rule was put in place. In addition to this, the NBA also widened the lane to 16 feet. Before that, the lane was just 12 feet. Also, the National Basketball Association introduced a rule that the ball can't be inbounded over the backboard, as Wilt was notorious for routinely lobbing the ball over the backboard. And the rule changes don't stop here. The NBA also introduced offensive goaltending and interference. So we have got another list of reasons, or rather rules, to remember Wilt by, in addition to his basketball genius. George Mikan. Next on our list is George Mikan, often nicknamed as Mr. Basketball. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest basketball players of all time. He had a long list of awards and accolades honoring his athletic talent, and many people regard him as the pioneer of professional basketball. An unusual characteristic about George was that he had eyesight problems. At 6 feet and 10 inches, this phenomenal basketball player wore spectacles even while playing. However, he didn't let his eyesight hold him back and went on to become one of the most legendary athletes of his time. George was not only responsible for NBA changing its rules once, but twice. The rules were primarily aimed at reducing his influence on the court. These rule changes included the lane being widened from 6 feet to 12 feet. This rule is more commonly known as the Mikan rule, as it was basically introduced to reduce his dominance on the court. In addition to this, defensive goaltending was also being outlawed by the NBA as a direct result of his influence. So you can just see how this bespectacled basketball king ruled an entire era. Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller is famous for playing with Indiana Pacers for the entire length of his 18 years in the NBA. He was also famous for his three-point shooting on the court, most commonly executed when he felt pressured in the game. In fact, Reggie retired with the record of the most three-point field goals ever made by a player. He is often regarded as the first viable threat from downtown, perhaps in the entire history of the league, which is quite an admirable feat. And in addition to being talented at basketball, Reggie was also clever. He was notorious for kicking while shooting. This caused the NBA to introduce a much-needed rule that players can't kick legs while shooting in a clever attempt to draw fouls. Darryl Dawkins. You must remember the mighty Darryl Dawkins violently slam dunking and shattering the glass. Although these were quite the statements back then, not to mention that it was an enormous crowd pleaser, the NBA quickly decided that they won't have any of this. Although Darryl only shattered the glass on 2 accounts, the NBA changed its rule and outlawed the practice. According to the new rule, breaking the backboard was a legitimate offense, and the player can be heavily fined and suspended, so yep, no more slam dunking. According to various reports, NBA Commissioner Larry O'Brien called Daryl in his office and straight up told him to go easy on the backboard. The commissioner threatened Daryl with a fine of $5,000, in addition to being suspended if he shattered the glass again. Charles Barkley. Although he was considered somewhat on the shorter side when it came to basketball players, he didn't let that weakness undermine him. What he lacked in height, he more than made up for it with his determination and aggression. He was responsible for the NBA changing one particular rule. Charles frequently used his posterior, aka his butt, to dodge off defenders for what seemed like a very long time, but actually it was around 20 seconds or so. The NBA quickly took notice of this situation and introduced a rule stating that no player can do this for more than 5 seconds. This rule is casually known as the booty rule among basketball fans. Yes, feel free to laugh all you want. As far as nicknames go, this one is definitely quite the comic. If you are enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit the thumbs up button down below. Shaquille O'Neal. By now you must have noticed something. All the NBA players on our list are very dominating and aggressive. They were usually the most influential players on the court, and that was often the primary reason why new rules were put in place. You would have also noticed how most of the rules were enacted to reduce their influence on the court. Our next player is no different. The 7'1" NBA player was unquestionably the most dominant in the center. He was absolutely ruthless when it came to the sport and showed no mercy to his opponents. He was so skilled that when his opponents tried to foul him, they were actually the ones who got hurt in the process. He once damaged the entire hoop after a slam dunk, and this forced the NBA to change the material of the backboards to make them more resistant to breakage. So, although damaging the backboard is now considered a very major offense, it is actually very difficult to shatter it now. Shaq is also responsible for another rule change. According to this rule, players can't intentionally foul opposing players, specifically the players who don't have the ball in their hands during the last 2 minutes of the game. Allen Iverson. The former American basketball player is often regarded as the reason why NBA laid specific rules regarding its dress code. In October 2005, the NBA was the first major sports league to issue a dress code. Before this rule, players like Allen Iverson usually wore baggy pants and jerseys everywhere. His somewhat flashy dressing was a memorable characteristic, which is why many people attribute this rule change to him. This rule strictly stated that all NBA players were required to be in formal business attire to games and a sports coat with dress shoes when they are on the benches. Dwayne Wade. As far as the new rules go, this one is surely the weirdest NBA rule on our list. It was enacted back when Heat guard Dwayne Wade was wearing a personalized band-aid on his injured left eye. Dwayne was seen wearing multiple bandages sporting logos on his left eye that had recently gotten stitches due to the injury. Although it was not much of any brand endorsement or anything, it was just a means of self-expression, but the NBA took quick notice and informed the player that there should be no logos or identification marks on the band-aids. This one might seem quite a peculiar rule, but needless to say, this became a new rule: no personalized band-aids. Rajon Rondo. You must remember the time Rajon Rondo and a few other players wore their headband upside down to a game. The logos on the headbands were inevitably facing downwards, and although it's not a big deal to anyone, the NBA quickly decided that it won't have any of that. Consequently, the NBA passed a new rule stating that headbands have to be worn properly, with the logos facing upwards. Which rule shocked you the most? This has to be the Band-Aid rule. Comment your answer down below and be sure to like and subscribe. In the meanwhile, check out one of the amazing videos on your screen.